What is up, everybody? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you guys are having a good day and a great week so far. Welcome to Midnight Hatter Live, the weekly variety show where we talk Gundam gaming and all of the good stuff. I am your host, Steven, and joining me as always is the well-dressed Adam Blue. How you doing, buddy? You're looking good in that shirt.
Thank you. We did a good job today with the way we dressed. I think we have taste,
Yeah,
I'd
yeah,
say.
no, it's we didn't call each other last night, so that's for sure.
Yeah, that's completely random, but completely awesome. It's like, the great minds quote.
Exactly, exactly. And you know what? I think that this is good because it is done, I think, in anticipation of this weekend. We've got big event
Mm,
coming up.
that's
I
right.
would be remiss if I did not remind everybody that if you are in the Raleigh, Carolina area, or if you're attending GalaxyCon this weekend, Adam and I are going to be there. We're going to
Yep.
be, high-fiving people, and I'll bring some goodies to share with you guys. So I hope you guys will come out and see us, and it'll just be a fun time, I think.
Yeah, it's crazy to think for it's like you and I talk at least once every week, and we have for
Yes.
like over a year, or I don't know how long we've been. And then it's like we're gonna be meeting each other in person. That's gonna be like some weird energy, like atomic bomb going off.
I know we're
Like,
gonna have to do the whole like fusion dance and
that'd be hilarious.
I'm looking forward to it. So
Yeah, me
yeah,
too.
if
Yeah,
you guys aren't in the Discord, definitely hop in either one of our Discords, hit us up, and
yeah,
we'll get that scheduled up and where we're all hanging out. I
yeah.
see that the chat's already pretty lively today. We got Zeonic Shadow, Talos, Shirt Lad, Dan, King Dylan, Goose. How are you guys doing? Thank you for hanging out. And yes, that new shirt that Zeonic Shadow is putting out, limited edition. This is not a mass release shirt, but it's pretty sweet looking. That Sharzaku.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's for sure.
Oh man. So, we do have a fun little topic to talk about today. You know, I never get to show off. I was talking to Adam about this before we started streaming here. Is a couple weeks ago I showed off the mobile suit
Chunksters.
chunkdom. These little chunky miniatures, and I have to say he looks even better when he's primed and ready to paint. Honestly.
Yeah, love it.
But it's funny because I always show off these things that I do for the Principality of Polygons tier of the Patreon, the 3D printing guys. Heck, I even started painting my 3D printed
Oh,
action base. So
wow.
this is I'm very excited about this. I screwed up some of the colors, so I'm gonna have to strip some off.
Where'd you screw it up?
Oh, just on the yellow. It's a little globby. So
Oh, okay, yeah, just maybe on the camera, but dude, that looks great. That's awesome.
yeah, this is exciting. And that's gonna be all of my Gunpla photography from now on is gonna be on that custom base. So I'm excited for that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I show off all of these 3D print stuffs, but then I never show off the stuff that I do for the Table Talker tier, which is our tabletop role playing game tier over on the Patreon. And we
Yep.
have some neat rewards there that I've put out over the last few months. Gundam 5e, playtest modules, things like that. Today, however, I want to show off what's coming out next month because it is a Dungeons and Dragons 5e or any kind of 5e system compatible enemy generator. And so using a random number generator and some weighting elements to it, you can actually just generate enemy stats on the fly, and it does almost everything for you. So I'm pretty excited to share that with you. But to kind of, uh, expand on that a little bit, I wanted to talk about how those same techniques not only inspired, randomly generated enemies for video games, things like the Nemesis system in Shadow of Mordor, but also how they could inspire other video game mechanics that are similar. So I
Cool.
think it'll be fun to talk about.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Um, but before we get into that, Adam, do you have any news that you wanted to share with us? I, I say news, but there's a bit of a pun involved there because there's a lot of new Gundam news going on with the high
Yeah.
new.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so in GBO2, the high new is getting released, which is pretty awesome because I think that's a cool suit. It's interesting to see where GBO2 is going with like suits they'd release. And so, because of that, I do have a video up on that. And then I have a video of some lore to the high new. And then I just built the real grade high new, which I got to a point where I was pretty much passing on most Gunpla, but Bandai actually sent me this one, and I gotta say that is the best real grade I have built, and I've built many of them. My first one was the unicorn. But what's very interesting about building this is it's the first time that I've built a Gunpla and the end result felt like a premium action figure and
Okay.
more than it did a model. So, like, then when it came time to do, like, the panel lining, it's like I didn't want to. It was almost like, I don't know, this plastic feels good because there's so many color separated plastic pieces that you're layering on each other where it's way, way, way less than almost in a way where if you're someone that likes to build models to the point where you're doing customization, it's probably not for you. This is more for people I think
Interesting.
that love premium action figures, but you actually get to build it. Because I mean, it's got
Pretty
you're
cool.
building a frame, and then you're building layers of armor, and it's all very deliberate and yeah, it's very interesting. I think it's a neat way to go about model kits.
I feel like I've noticed that with a few high grades or high grades, few real grades. Like so, for instance, I have the Mark II, the Zeta, and
Yeah,
the Zaku 2, and all of them I don't feel like you know you can. There's certain areas that you can panel line, but like you said, there's so many color separated panels that
yeah,
sometimes you don't even have a panel line to fill in because
right.
it's you're gonna put the ink there and it's just gonna bleed right through the to the back of the piece.
Yeah, so if anything, it would be, if someone likes to do color changes to their Gunpla, the real grades can lend to that because of all the little pieces already separated, probably less masking than you would have to worry about doing, and you could
Exactly.
get it painted. But I gotta say, it's an action figure. It's crazy to think. Yeah, I'm really
Awesome.
and I really like it because as much as the real grade new Gundam was cool, that fin funnel system was just crap. It just would fall apart, and it made me just not wanna touch it and just forget about it, even though I still thought it was cool. So,
Which is
a little
funny
weird there.
because, that has been lauded as one of the best real grades on the market is the new, but, even with it's just one of those things. That's a quirk of the
Yeah.
mobile suit itself. And same could be said about the real grade Zeta is,
Oh, yeah.
the real grade Zeta's transformation makes it such a finicky and, kind of loose piece. There's a I really loved when Jobby the Hong reviewed that third party Megatron
Yeah.
Transformer toy, and the transformation on that thing was just so many like little panels and little pins and pegs and stuff like that. And you have to respect the engineering that goes into some of these
Yeah.
transformation systems in toys and model kits. But at a certain point, you do have to sacrifice, anime accuracy for the function of the figure. And
Yeah.
man, some of those third party transformers with all of their little bits and bobs, they're just hand grenades,
Yeah, that's
I,
yeah, I haven't got much into those, and, back on that real grade Zeta that you're bringing up, it's like, that's the thing, that's what's so annoying about it, it almost makes it where it's horrible, but it looks great.
yeah,
Like, for a Zeta design, it looks great, so it's almost, like, awesome just to have it for that, you know?
definitely. And
Yeah.
and I think that one of the fun projects that I've had going on is I have taken some of those parts from the real grade Zeta that work really well, like the wing system on the real grade Zeta actually is
Oh, yeah.
quite functional. The way that the wings like kind of hinge out and, just kind of retrofitting them to fit on the high grade Zeta, you know, and just
Yeah,
make it a parts
that's
former
awesome, actually.
transforming. That I think that way you get the detail and the cool look of the real grade, but in a
Yeah,
high
no,
grade
I
transform.
agree, that's what's cool about Gunpla and the variations is kinda swapping them. But, real quick, again, yeah, before we get into the main topics, did you happen to notice any Gundam news out of San Diego Comic-Con? I know they, like, announced some action figures, but I think that was more in Japan, but I didn't notice anything Gundam related announced.
No, neither did I. And obviously following all of the news accounts, Gundam Info and
No.
Bandai Dave.
Oh, yeah,
I was
yeah.
hoping that he would post some stuff, but he was posting a lot about some Star Wars figures and some of
Yeah,
that
kinda
stuff.
the Tamashi, yeah, Nations figures and all that, but yeah, I thought maybe they would, like, announce, maybe an extended trailer on
Or yeah,
that Requiem for
Requiem.
Vengeance, or maybe a update to the movie, which is well, you know what? Then there's that whole writers actors strike, so I wonder how much that affects what they can talk about there.
That's a good point. But
Yeah.
then, the other thing that you have to consider is Gundam news typically comes out more at New York Comic Con because that's Anime NYC and New York Comic Con both happen at the Javits Center at the same time. Whereas San Diego Comic Con, there's a little bit of anime stuff going on there, but that one really is like an entertainment festival as opposed to like an anime
Oh,
convention.
I
Um,
see.
and even New
Okay.
York has to a degree has become that. I haven't been in probably 7 years ish.
I've
Because
never been.
I was like I can. It's like as much as I love Supernatural, it's like I don't know, I don't want to sit on a panel of actors talking about True Blood. Like, what does that have to do with comic books?
Yeah. No, that is interesting because I guess there is these sort of meta relevancies of each con that's like, what's really the thing it's come to people expecting? And I actually think San Diego Comic Con, yeah, was more about the movies, comic book movies.
Right.
And this year, and it's crazy because like even the recent comic book movies haven't been doing that well. Although Barbie and Oppenheimer, I guess, broke records.
Yeah.
Which, to be honest,
Barbenheimer.
I'll see those movies eventually. I'm not crazy to see them, but it's actually neat that those did well, because it's like those are kinda different in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do hope that that starts a trend of, you know, maybe not maybe not Barbie to a particular degree, but Oppenheimer at least. It's a Nolan film, so all
Yeah,
Christopher Nolan films tend to get overhyped. But just bringing in some new IP, that way we're not constantly seeing remakes or sequels of the existing stuff that's out there. But
exactly.
but
Yeah.
even to that degree, like Barbie, the Mario movie was a
Oh, yeah.
big success. So we're starting to see some franchises that have not previously been adapted into films be adapted into films really well. So that's kind of
You know
cool.
what? Good point, because if we look at the Mario movie, which then was the highest, of something
It was
until
probably like the
Barbie came
highest
out.
animated feature or something like that.
Or something to do with, like, the Monday following, like, the highest but both of those do, and I haven't seen the Barbie movie, but I've seen the trailers. They do a good job of, like, representing the source material
Yeah,
visually, and I think that's key. Like, the X-Men movies didn't do a good job of that, even though they were successful, and
right.
then we see some things sometimes where they make these movies, and it's like, that doesn't look like, but these movies were successful and they represented that. And I think deep down, that's what people want. It reminds me of those old Mortal Kombat commercials, live action commercials, where it was like people like in the costumes. It's like that's what they need to do in the movies, even though the movies look pretty cool, but
Yeah.
like the commercials for these things.
I
Yeah.
know. Oh man, it's so funny you mentioned that because I went back and I was watching some old gameplay footage from the Mortal Kombat Mythologies Sub-Zero game,
Oh
which
yeah.
that
Yeah.
game was so awful. But I mean, the live action cutscenes from it, where it's like they had actual actors and Quan Chi, telling Sub-Zero, that.
Yeah.
Oh man,
That
so cool. Those I think that those types of things were definitely ahead of their time because I think that if you saw live action cutscenes in a video game now, I mean, that would be kind of cool.
yeah, that's true that we don't get that anymore. I remember Command and Conquer did that, and that was awesome. I,
Even Gundam did it with that.
Oh, yeah, that's old PC game.
Yeah,
Yeah, they tried to, so that's the thing. It's like, I wonder if a lot of people that are making that are in the film industry now that aren't the executive level creators, they are tapping into that source, that where that joy comes from.
yeah,
Whereas a lot of times when you get these movies, you have an executive that's like, "Hey, there's this movie from this franchise. Oh, well, let me put my spin on it."
right.
And then it's like kinda, you
Let me
know.
David Lynchify this and.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that as much as I enjoyed the Super Mario Brothers movie, with John Leguizamo and
Oh, yeah.
what's that actor's name?
Bob Hoskins.
Bob Hoskins. Yes, because
Yeah.
Bob Hoskins was a fantastic Mario.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think the creators of that were legit creators. So they
Yeah.
made something intriguing, even if when I was a kid, I was like, "What am I seeing?" What like, so confused, like, how is this reality? Like, think about a kid that doesn't understand production and creatives, and
Right.
they're seeing that Mario movie, and it's like, "What?"
What is going on here? And I think one of my favorite trends of the 90s was the video game movie adaptation video game. So,
Yes,
like,
Street
there was
Fighter
the
did that, yeah.
exactly, the Street Fighter video, which ironically was like a knockoff Mortal Kombat, which
Yeah, yeah, that would yeah, because it used, that motion capture, live action, whatever capture, yeah.
yeah,
That stuff was interesting. I and that but that gave us a lot of cool Batman games. I loved it because there's the Batman animated games, then the Batman movie games, and then just
right.
Batman games. Like
And that trend kind of extended into the 2000s with the Spider-Man video games because you
yeah,
had
that's
that
right.
Spider-Man video game that was so good, and then the Spider-Man movie video games were basically just taking the Spider-Man
Yeah.
video game and reskinning it, which was like I wasn't complaining about that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's and then it's weird though because then there was a time, I think it was with the Amazing Spider-Man games, where I
Hmm.
wasn't playing them anymore. They were just not as good.
Yeah,
The, right before then they got back to like, okay, let's or the PS4, I think, was when they got back into
yeah.
making them
Let's
good.
do like the open
Yeah.
city
Yeah,
that
the getting the
concept
swinging back, the fun swinging around. Yeah.
exactly. So I mean,
Cool.
there's so many so many cool I guess entertainment trends that are going on right now that I'm excited to see how they play out.
Well, one trend that's missing, and I think this will get us into our topic, is and I think it might have to start with the tabletop mindset, but in video games, rarely are enemy AIs interesting other than memorizing move sets.
That's true. And
Yeah.
it's there are certain AI that I think get a little bit better, but then late game they kind of fall apart. One example being the AI in Metal Gear Solid 5 is they have kind of a weighted system when it comes to adapting to your tactics. So for instance, if you're the kind of guy that when you're playing as Snake and you're, infiltrating a stronghold, you like to hang back and do a lot of sniping, all of a sudden you'll see that the enemies start wearing helmets and,
Oh,
making
that's
it so
cool.
that they can't be killed from far away. But then once you get to late game, basically everybody's full body armor. They have night vision. They like that
Ah,
every tactic that you could possibly use against them, you've already exhausted it.
ah,
So there's an attempt was made, I think.
yeah. Yeah, that's
But yeah, thank you for that beautiful segue because I do think
yeah.
that, like you said, tabletop is sort of an inspirational tool for a lot of video games, and I think it has been since the '80s on.
Yeah, I think even if a video game had the enemy character you were up against, I think back then, because it was less about animation and graphics, it had to be about numbers.
Yeah,
And so they just had to pull from tabletop, I think. And then as games evolved and branched for like real time combat or RPG or whatever, they were really just adopting those tabletop elements.
yeah, and I would say that one advantage or well, I wouldn't say it's an advantage, but as tabletop kind of got away from the numbers based systems and got more narrative based, started having things where maybe the numbers can be a little bit more flexible because it's the character of your enemy that is part that you're kind of using as your creative muscle.
Yeah.
And that's where something like the Nemesis system comes into play.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
with that said, like I said, I do want to share what I've been building for next month's Table Talker Patreon reward tier. So, if you guys haven't, check it out because this is what you have to see. Swap over to my screen share here. So, what we have here is just a basic web page. Oh, get rid of that stupid thing. So it's a basic web page. You know, the formatting is a little awkward because I have it scaled up so huge on my screen so that you can actually read it on the stream. But the idea here is you can take, your challenge rating, which, this is 5e compatible, so you can select, hey, if I've got a party of 4 level 4 players, I want this to challenge them. Archetype is something that's not native to D&D 5e, but I am using it as a way of classifying the type of enemy that we are going to create, right? So You can have it set to random, and it'll just select one of these randomly, but these are borrowed from Dungeons and Dragons 4e for the most part. So you have things like the Brute, which is like a tanky character, the Soldier, which is more of a defensive type character, things like the Controller, which is like they're going to have more area of effect abilities, things like that. And then I tacked on
Mhm.
things like Flyer and Swimmer to the end there so that we have some terrain specific enemy types. I'm just going to leave it at random for now to show you that this actually works no matter what you select. And then of course we have our terrain, which for the most part this doesn't play a huge role into you know how the enemy is generated aside from their speeds, but also there are some abilities that give them terrain bonuses. So, sometimes they'll move faster underwater or they'll move faster in grasslands versus mountain lands, things like that. Again, if you leave it set to random, it'll generate randomly. And so we just come over here, hit our generate button. There we go. We've got a
Mhm.
enemy that has 119 hit points. You have to roll a 14 to hit it. It has a -1 initiative, so it's going to be a little slow boy, which is surprising given that it was a skirmisher. We've got point that I should bring up is that speeds and ranges, I made them in units, like squares on a board. And the reason I did that is because if, say, for instance, you're using this for Gundam 5e, we use meters instead of feet, and so
Oh,
measuring it in squares makes it a little easier to manage if you're adapting to different ranges. So yeah, I mean, you get all of their character attributes. You get speeds. We have resistances and immunities, which this character does not.
oh,
This character can perform 2 attacks per turn, and just has one attack, which is melee attack, +5 to hit, deals two d8 fire damage. It doesn't. I didn't want to put anything specific in the attacks, like because ultimately the attack is just flavor, right? So if we wanted to name this creature, maybe it's like a fire elemental that just has like a flaming punch, and that's its attack, right?
oh, okay. Yeah.
Um, Now if we wanted to keep these same settings, we can just hit generate again, and now all of a sudden we
Oh,
have
yeah.
uh, you know, resistance to slashing damage. So do that, and it can't be restrained. So maybe it's an incorporeal enemy that can't be grappled, and so therefore, you know, well, this one of course does thunder damage instead of fire damage. So there's you know really cool stuff that you can do with it. And then of course, if you want to just reset everything to 0, you just hit the reset button. And when you really want to get exciting with it, you come up to like a challenge rating of 30, which would be like epic level, you know, end game characters. Generate that, and all of a sudden we have immunity to poison damage, immunity to cold damage, resistance to slashing damage, and then it's got some features here where it creates an anti-magic field within what is this, a 6 space radius of itself. It's got a couple of melee attacks.
Okay, you know what? This is interesting. Tell me if I'm wrong here, but I've been, learning about tabletop from you,
Sure.
learning about GBO2 from Lord Talos. Looking
Yes.
at this reminds me of looking at the stats and skills screen of a mobile suit because it's like,
Yeah.
sure, here's the stats, but then here's some features of what its move can be. Like you were kind of saying, yeah, it could be a flame punch, but here's what that actually means
Yeah.
for and I'm that's making me see more of a connection with GBO2 and tabletop than I did before.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that when you have these types of enemies or even just characters that you're trying to represent certain abilities or certain attributes that they have, you end up having to come up with these sort of convoluted structures of like, well, how do I represent that mechanically? How can I tie that to a dice result? And this is how you would do it: is you have these types of mechanisms that can generate that. Now, the benefit here is that, of course, it's generated for you automatically. You don't have to think about, well, if it's a challenge rating 30, then I want to make sure that it has a certain number of hit points. All of that work is done for you. And it's even randomized and weighted in such a way that, I'm going to show you the source code here in just a moment, that
Okay.
For instance, it may be a challenge rating 30, but that doesn't mean that the hit points are always going to be 543. If we hit generate again, hit points drop to 464 because
Oh,
it's
yeah.
it's it's within a range of hit points that are acceptable. And this is one of the things that I really like about this is that for every resistance, and I think that Talos has probably mentioned this in terms of GBO2, is that certain units in GBO2 will have resistance to damage types, which makes their
Right.
effective hit points actually much larger than what the number shows, right? So a unit might
Yeah.
have 1800
Lot of
hit points, but because it has resistance to ballistic weapon types, its effective hit points become like 2200.
Yeah, that's very interesting because then that's something that's almost not necessarily on display here. It's almost like you gotta think about it, right?
Right. And
Yeah.
so that's one of those things that I actually built into this calculator is that, for every damage resistance, the number of hit points is actually going to go down slightly because its effective hit points are actually higher.
Ah,
So,
interesting.
basically I wanted to craft this system to work and take as many of the different variables out of your hands as I can, right?
Yeah.
So, for instance, even when it comes to actions, if we've got a multi-attacking character that performs 5 attacks per turn, then we don't want them to deal the maximum amount of damage that they could deal every hit. So basically, what happens is when we're calculating actions and we're calculating what types of attacks they're doing, the damage of individual attacks is going to be scaled down based on the number
Right.
of attacks that they perform per turn. And so
So
that
then
way,
it will average out near the amount of damage that is supposed
exactly.
to. Yeah,
And of
that's
course, as always, I have all of these things tied to a fancy Google sheet that, we've got columns that represent our challenge rating, our minimum damage per round, our maximum damage per round, minimum HP, maximum HP, average HP. And you might be wondering, why have all three values? Because if you have the minimum and maximum, then you don't need an average. I will show you why that is important here in a little bit. Um, we've got our attack bonuses, our proficiencies, save DC. That's if they have a special ability that forces you to make a save. Which for instance, there are certain abilities in Dungeons and Dragons that might trip you, and so you have to make a dexterity save in order to avoid falling prone. So that's like an example of that. So
Hmm.
that scales up with their level. Got their minimum, maximum, average armor class, which is their difficulty to hit. This is where we have the damages in the specific dice that they deal. So, for instance, a level 8 challenge, right? If it were dealing damage in d6s, it's going to take less d6s to get to the average damage per round than it would fours. And so that's where some of those damages calculations come in when it comes to like which damage, like how much damage a single attack does, right? So
Yeah.
like if if a level 8 character deals 9d6 damage, but then they do 2 attacks per turn, then each of those attacks is going to be 4.5, or we round down to 4 damage per attack.
Wow.
So a lot of a lot of math going to all of this.
Yeah.
We also have our ranges and feature details, things like this. This is where all of that data is stored, which is awesome because that allows us to expand on this. Is like if we
Yeah.
wanted to add
That's
more
cool.
archetypes, if we wanted to add more features, more terrains, more conditions, we can do that. And the generator doesn't care. It's just going to take whatever values are stored on the sheet and spit them out. So
So when you generate one, are you able to kinda, like, save that? Is there an option to save it, or would you just screenshot it?
that is probably something that I would need to add in. So right now you could just screenshot it, but
Yeah.
if we wanted to, I could build a button that kind of like exports to PDF, and that might be the way to go.
That would be cool, like, and I'm just throwing this out there. It exports to PDF and formats it and has, like, let's say you have a bunch of art of, like, arms, legs, torsos, heads, and it randomizes like an enemy.
like like an AI generated
Yeah. Yes. Or it's just that where it uses this and creates a prompt for auto-generating, like, an enemy.
Now that's a pretty sweet idea. That might take me a
Yeah.
little longer to put together, but I do
But no,
like
that
this. I
well,
like
yeah, I
where this is
found
going.
someone that made a script for, auto-generating, memes. It would just but it would
Nice.
be anything. But based on the text that it would auto-generate text that would have sort of a meme sentence to it,
Yeah.
and then it would create an image based on that. I'll have to send you the video on that.
Which is hilarious because like Zoomer humor could very easily be AI generated. Like
Oh,
there's
yeah.
it's so funny the way that memes used to be like in the early 2000s, then you look at memes now and it's like I'm just going to make a deep fried meme. It's going to be like, Char Aznable but like with glowing eyes and
Right, it's like the meme really has no there's nothing to it other than this is supposed to be funny. We're supposed to all have seen this and be like, "Oh, it's that meme." You
yeah,
know what I mean?
it's
Like,
like meta
it
humor.
yeah,
It's funny because we're making fun of humor itself. I don't know. It's
yeah. No, that's what I think that's what the joke is. It's like anything can be humor.
yeah,
It's almost like a
all you
a
need to
a
do is
joke.
laugh at it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a joke on how we respond to things. Yeah, that's funny. Hmm.
But if I want to give you guys a peek under the hood and show you how some of this stuff works, this is the source code for the generator, which this is all going to be available to the patrons, so you guys can dig into it, take it apart. To be honest with you, the entire format of the page is less than 100 lines, like because
Oh,
everything is stored in the database and it's made, via these scripts. So that's pretty cool. Is that like functionally it's pretty lightweight you know as far as how much code is actually involved with it. So this is basically where the meat of everything happens. Is when you click that generate button, this little generate function runs. And so the first thing it does is check to see if an archetype or a terrain are selected, and if they are not, it will generate a random one for you. Um, but then once that's done, we set our hit points, we set our armor class, we set our ability scores, movement speeds, resistances, features, and actions. And when you get to like the resistances, features, and actions, that's when at the end of those functions we'll actually come back and reset the hit points. Like I said, if there is a damage resistance, it's going to drop the hit points by a certain percentage, which is actually dynamic and tied to the challenge rating of the enemy. So, like for instance, an enemy that is level 8 may have their hit points reduced even further than an enemy that is level 17,
oh,
which kind of ups the challenge rating of them a little
yeah.
bit. So we've got our randomizers here for the archetyping class. But right here is where I wanted to share that weighting system talking about and why we need the averages, the minimum and maximum of these values. So when we get to the ability scores section, what we do is we actually will, for the highest value ability score, which we store it as just its own number for now, but what we do is rather than just set it to the maximum that it could be, we calculate random value between average and the maximum instead of the minimum and max. So instead of having a wide range of numbers that it could be, let's say that let's hop in here and I'll use some actual numbers to show this off. So here is where we have our ability scores. So if our max ability score is 13, our minimum is 3, and our average between those two numbers is 8. What I can do is by weighting it, instead of selecting a random number between 3 and 13 to make its strongest value, I want its strongest value to be weighted towards being strong. And I could just set it to 13, but that's kind of boring because it's predictable. Instead, I take a random value between 8 and 13. That way, you know that it's above average no matter what. And it might be max or it might be average, but you know that it's above average. Similarly, whatever we want their weakest score to be, so like let's say we're generating like an ogre or a troll or something, right? I want its strength to be above average, so it's going to be between 8 and 15. But I want its intelligence to be below average. So what I'll do is I'll set the random number between 3 and 8. That way, it might be a little smarter than your average troll, but it might not.
I
It
like that. That variable aspect of this, the it's kind of like the backbone of what makes it interesting, I think is,
Yeah.
it's because I think that's the element of tabletop that I appreciate because with, board games sometimes it's very static of what's going on, you know?
Yeah, and this can be a valuable tool for dungeon masters, game masters, because there's a lot of players out there that just memorize the monster manual. And
Oh,
so when
yeah.
you describe a vampire, they're like, "Oh, I know that a vampire is resistant to this, this, and this, and I know that they have this many hit points. Hey guys, let's make sure we use fire." And this takes that completely out of play because you have
Yeah,
no idea what the
that's
random
good.
generator is going to spit out. It'll give you rough ideas, but
Yeah, that's great.
so this type of generator is something that I would love to implement into a video game. And
Yeah.
I think that it's been done to a certain degree with the Nemesis system in the Shadow of Mordor game, right?
Mhm.
Because you have these procedurally generated enemies, you know, obviously their appearances are randomized and things like that, but like and you have more experience with it than I do. How randomized are their attributes? How randomized are their stats?
That's a good question because playing through that game, and I played that. I didn't play the sequel as much, but I really played through that original, and I felt like it was promising, but it didn't go all the way to where it potentially could, based on what you're just showing me here. I think it did some basic thing like here's this enemy type, and if it kills you, you know, then it later, like, it can come back and be a little more powerful, and they made it cinematically where there would be a cutscene where it talks to you like, "Oh, I know who you are," and then it is a little more powerful, and I just don't think they went all the way with it reminds me, like, let's say when we're playing, a Souls game, a lot
Yeah.
of that is based on the enemy attacks, like, you're just memorizing what their attacks are when they're gonna do the attack. And I kind of wish sometimes it would be a little more dynamic. Like, let's say the enemy, it's like an if then where the enemy sees the player is holding a broadsword. Maybe it will only do certain attack types, or
Yes.
it will only do certain dodges. And so that could help the player too to be like, okay, I'm going to try to fight it with this because I might be able to, do better against it doing something else. But then let's say if and this could be story based, like if you're killing a lot of the boss's minions before you get to the boss of an area, depending on how you killed them, the boss would be prepared for that fighting style. And
Yeah.
so it would be collecting data as you're killing enemies and be like, okay, this person does a lot of ranged stuff, so I'm going to stay back with a shield. And
And it seems like it would be pretty simple to create that sort of dynamism because we already do it with boss fights in general. Like, players react to the external stimuli of the boss,
yeah,
right? Like, we have boss phases where it's like, okay, I know that they're invulnerable to this type of attack when they're in this phase. So why couldn't the boss react to the player in the same way? And it doesn't have to be um you and I have talked about like the kind of punishing systems that I've come up with for Souls like games. It
yeah.
doesn't have to be that degree. I mean, you can gamify that system too, where maybe, like you said, if the enemy is going to behave a particular way when you have a broadsword out versus when you have a lance or a bow and arrow, maybe you use that to your advantage and you take out the broadsword in order to get the enemy to do something so that then you take out your bow and.
Yeah, that's a thing that I feel like games don't do too much, and if they do, it's very surface level or obvious. Like, I wanna say I forget what game I've played, and I don't know when, and I don't know if it's Souls or something. I just remember sometimes I would see enemies would crouch down and kinda go behind cover a lot. It's like,
Yeah.
"Okay, what was it I did that made them wanna go behind cover? Is it because I'm using my ranged weapon?" And it's like there was a time, and I think it was Far Cry, the first Far Cry, where it seemed like they were going somewhere with the enemy AI because you could like trick them where you could like walk one way and then they'd think you're somewhere else. And it was done very well. But then after that, games stopped yeah, I think the Nemesis system after Far Cry, Nemesis system was the next to try to attempt something. But I'm just curious why, when part of making a tabletop game very dynamic and engaging is that random element of not knowing what's coming. Why haven't video games been doing that? Because even with
Yeah.
Souls, you can just memorize the boss animations and then kill them without getting attacked, without any armor on.
Yeah. I mean, there are people that do it.
Yeah.
Famously, people that will beat millennia in
Yeah, with a
in
Guitar Hero controller.
yeah.
And you know, and so I feel like I wonder if that's and maybe it's one of those things where, Souls, which I am surprised has become so popular because of its difficulty, where then people then are more universally accepting challenges like that, where then naturally the next step is adding more randomized elements of, like you're saying, maybe the boss has this many hit points, but depending on what's going on at any given action, it could be a variable between, a certain amount, depending on everything else that's going on. um I think that's what games really need. I think that even helps you feel more like you're playing an RPG than
Yeah.
just going through, "Okay, I know what to spell to use, and I'm just gonna blast through all these enemies." Instead, it's like, "Oh, man, what's going on at any moment? I gotta crouch here and duck, get some cover, figure out,
Exactly.
okay, what do I do?"
Yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah.
that the objective of video games, I think for since their inception, at least, from action standpoint, there's lots of different varieties of video games. I should kind of step back. Pong is not going to be one that's going to be
Yeah.
dynamic, and but the idea is that the game developers have always been trying to replace the game master, the dungeon master of a role-playing game, where as a person, I know that the players at my table, if they're behaving in a particular way, I can adjust my strategies, adjust my tactics, fudge my dice rolls, whatever it takes to kind of reintroduce that challenge to them and keep them engaged.
Yeah, that's
And,
a good
there's
point.
ways to kind of punish players to keep them engaged, and that's kind of cruel. But
Hmm.
for me, it's really just about maintaining a particular challenge level. Is like, I don't want to over challenge the player. I want to make sure that it's right in line with what they're doing, and I think that Capcom has implemented that to a certain degree. Like you said, everybody's just kind of scratched the surface of what's possible when it comes to these types of dynamic systems, like with the Resident Evil adjustable difficulty,
Oh, yeah.
um, where if you're getting bit more often, things like that, you're going to get more weapon drops, more health drops. Enemies are going to be there. Maybe it'll spawn less enemies, things like that. But you can also weight these systems where, like I said, you know maybe the difficulty is going to be a random value, but it's going to be above average. So sometimes you'll see this in the speedrunning community a lot when it comes to Resident Evil games in particular. They know that, okay, if I get bit around this corner, there's only going to be 3 zombies that spawn instead of 5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let myself get bit so that I can game
Oh,
that.
yeah. You're
Well,
gaming the dynamism instead of
ex-
it
ex-
being, like, affecting you immediately.
Whereas maybe, yeah, if you do get bit, there's a higher percentage chance that there's going to be less zombies, but it might not be 3, it might be 4, or maybe it'll be all
Yeah.
5.
See, that would then help that yeah, it almost seems like, and you almost brought this up, like, it's almost like the next system is like the game master system,
Yeah,
where there's this you can call it an AI if that's for marketing, but this, like,
yeah,
sort of character that actually runs the game, but it's not part of the story or anything. It's just like
right.
the way you market it. But what it does is it calculates all the variables that could possibly happen, and it has a weighted system for each variable as you're going through the world. That is interesting because it could make it where then every time you play a certain game, it could be completely different.
Yeah.
You know,
And I think that not only does that increase the replayability of these types of video games, famously, uh, Diablo 4 devs have, kind of cheesed their own game in the last patch in order to make sure that players are not advancing as quickly as they could be. And it's like, you don't have to do that in such a blatant and kind of despicable way. There's
well,
ways that you can kind of tease that system out, I think, using something like this.
Yeah, I mean, this shows, and I think it's like this with a lot of games, it shows how much gamers do expect more.
Yes.
And if they don't get that, and they can get over the barrier of what the game is expecting the player to do, then they're gonna do the things like you talk about, like speed running hacks or brute forcing things. Like, sometimes it's fun, and that's interesting because it just made me think, sometimes in a game, I will try to brute force something because I know that, okay, this game has this ceiling of mechanics,
Right.
but I could probably brute force the expectations. Whereas if you're adding the variables, the weighted variables, that would not make you think you have to brute force something. It's like I just have to learn how to use the mechanics and my tool set effectively and be able to adapt on the fly. And
Yeah.
that, man, I really think that's what needs to be next for games to make them more interesting.
Yeah, and because I think, and this topic came up on my Discord the other day, is people brought up the idea of a wins rooms in GBO2,
Oh, yeah.
and and one of the things that immediately came to my mind is that players, both tabletop and video game players, if given the opportunity, will optimize the fun out of any video game that they're playing.
Yeah.
They will remove all challenges and do whatever cheats and whatever exploits they can find in order to maximize their potential of success. And then they'll complain that the game's not fun.
Yeah, and I think that would then have to show a developer, okay, you need to come up with a more intriguing way for them to collect the data, because then that gets into the monetization system, like,
Right.
getting credit tokens or whatever. It's like, well, if you need the AB rooms for tokens, maybe there needs to be another way to get tokens. Eh,
Or we use weighted systems that where like, your drops in, because you can always account for the behavior of the player, right? So like you know, player inputs are only limited to what they can do, and what they can do because you programmed it.
well,
So,
interesting. So it could be where your daily missions rewards are based on how you play and not what everyone has to do every day.
and honestly, you could even do it in such a way where, like, yeah, maybe if you do want to have a wins rooms and you want to kind of optimize things for yourself, you might get a lower percentage chance of certain drops compared to if you play if you play the way that the developers want you to play. Let's put it that way. I hate using the term like the way the game's supposed to be played,
Yeah,
but
right.
if you play in a way that the developers want you to play, the rewards are greater.
Yeah,
I'm not saying take away the rewards or punish the players for playing a
right.
particular way, but what you want to do is scale your rewards in such a way that, and we talked about this before with Doom. You know, they didn't want players to kind of cower back and wait for
Oh,
enemies
right.
to come to them. And so, they don't make it more difficult by doing that. What they do is they reward you with health for getting
Yeah,
in close and doing what they want you to do, which is, maintain a high level, high octane action
right.
game.
That's a great idea. In so you here's a surface level example, but like in GBO2, what if one of the dailies is play a match with this suit, and the suit that it's listing is one that you have in your inventory that you've played the least?
Yeah.
It's just saying, "Hey, play with this suit." Oh, and it could be as simple, as something like that, or in a match, get 2 support kills. It's like, "I don't really play a support that much. The game knows this,
Yeah.
so then I'm using a support unit." Yeah.
And all of this data is stored. We know that it's
Yeah.
stored because obviously you can go into GBO2 and you can look at and see like, oh, what are your most favorite suits? Like what do you play the most often? All of it's stored in a database very similar to what we're looking at here with this 5e generator data. And so it's
Yeah.
like, why not, instead of saying like you said, you can randomize it per player and have the script say, hey, play with this random suit that I know you have because I just searched your inventory, I know what suits you're using and the percentages that you use with them.
Yeah, that's cool because it makes a unique experience for anybody. And yeah, I mean, and I know I keep using GBO2 as an example because I'm playing that all the time, but even like Call of Duty, they're real big with their challenges. There can be some set static challenges that are just about the game world to get you to explore the world more, but then there could be player specific challenges that really are use this weapon because you've never equipped it,
Yeah.
you know? Or what if a challenge is like equip 2 weapon or 2 equipment loadouts that you've never used, like, at the same time. It's like, "Oh, that would be an interesting way to play the game. Let me equip these 2," and you play a match with it, and then you get your points or something.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I've actually learned that there's a buried experience system within Tears of the Kingdom, and they're numbers that are misrepresented.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you've seen how the damage output values when it comes to the weapons in Tears of the Kingdom are actually scaled, similar to
Right.
how I do the damage scaling in this, where it's like
That is interesting. So they kinda have that built in. Yeah.
exactly. So it's like they know that there are variables that the player doesn't take into account, like swing speed and like how many hits per second that you can get with a spear versus with an axe. And so they'll rank the damage, like the damage of a spear is slightly elevated from what it should be because they know
Yeah.
that you're going to be able to land more hits per second versus the damage that is shown on screen of an axe is slightly lower because they know that it's going to take a longer wind up to get that single hit. So what it was designed to do is to encourage players to use particular weapons and to vary their attacks.
Yeah, that's interesting because that's another thing that I guess was this not in Breath of the Wild?
I think it was, but they increased that amount.
Okay.
So it used to be where the numbers were a little closer together, but now it's even further apart where it's like,
'Cause I
you
do
might
know, yeah, the enemies got a little tougher. There would be different colored enemies depending on
yeah,
how power and so I think, yeah, it sounds like Tears of the Kingdom went a step further, and maybe that is the thing, and that would be cool if Nintendo kinda did revolutionize the sort of the AI, systems where and again, it sounds like they are using this sort of variable scaling system that you're putting at display here,
yeah,
so,
yeah. I mean, for instance, the kind of hidden experience system in Tears of the Kingdom is like, oh, you get, I think it's like 15 experience points if you beat like a boss, a goblin or whatever. But that amount increases by 5 if you use certain attack types. So if you
yeah.
use the flurry rush, or if you do like a perfect dodge, or you execute techniques, the game knows that you've done that and it rewards you with more experience. Or vice versa, like if you take a lot of damage while you're fighting them, you're going to get less
Oh,
experience. And that way, the challenge scaling is suited to the player that's playing, which is why it's kind of frustrating, I think, for me and my wife, because we'll play on the same save and she'll just totally like tank a boss bokoblin, and then when I get on to play, the challenge, the experience system has increased the challenge rating so high that I'm just getting thrashed by Lionels and stuff,
oh.
so
That's cool. That's another, yeah, cool thing that, Nintendo's doing with Zelda, and it's one that's not, like, really talked about too much. It's one of those where it's more
exactly.
people figure it out and then make videos. It's not like it's a marketing thing.
Yeah. So I mean, I would like to bring these types of systems to the forefront, and like I said, this is why I do what I do, and this is why I share these types of resources with the people that support my work, because these are the types of things that I want to continue to implement and hopefully inspire people to use, because if you have this kind of toolkit in your at your disposal and it's like, oh well, I can just use I can use Steven's formula for how to generate a random enemy. I'm just gonna copy and paste that right into my Unity game and
Yeah.
go for it.
Yeah, that's, yeah, I tell you, as much as sometimes I feel like games sometimes get a little samey and I think there's potential. We just have to wait till the market adapts to it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's gonna start with games kind of like Diablo, those sort of action RPGs that the gameplay itself is kind of. I wouldn't say that it's boring. I understand the appeal of it. For me, it's not the kind of game that I enjoy playing where you're just kind of like spamming
Yeah.
commands. But those are very number heavy and RNG heavy games where you can take a table of data like this and output
Well,
enemies on mass.
that's a good point. The reason I haven't jumped into Diablo 4 yet is after playing other ones, it's like, yeah, there's these numbers to it, but it's still very, like, easy, and I don't know if that's the right word to use, but it's like I don't really have to think too much even though I'm not good at thinking about numbers. I don't know what it is.
I think it's easy to conceptualize, like even if you're not like a very math oriented person, it's easy to conceptualize, oh, I know that this input is going to generate that output based on whatever formula you have at your disposal. Um, so, and like you said, I think that that's where things like gameplay and you can always tweak numbers like, oh, this does more damage, this does like less hit points, like, okay, that stuff is it's almost getting there. But when you take something like that and then you expound it into behaviors and like you said,
Yeah.
AI that is going to respond to certain stimuli and you weight those responses based on variables that are generated for them. Maybe you have enemies that are more prone to be aggressive, but maybe not always. And
Yeah,
so,
it reminds me of Sniper Elite 5, where sometimes an enemy will go and alert other enemies
yeah,
instead of taking you head on, and while that's kind of probably an easy, simple thing to program, I'll make this enemy will go like that level, like if they can add more of that into just as you're playing, because you're not expecting it, something where it makes any encounter a story you can tell someone.
that, and ultimately, isn't that what we're trying to achieve in
Yeah,
in gaming, both tabletop and video gaming? Is we want to have stories, we want to have narrative, and I think that even sporting events can tell stories, right? Like,
yeah, that's right.
so yeah, I think creating those cinematic moments, those storytelling moments in the mechanics of the game, as opposed to just a cutscene, I think is a
Yeah.
pretty cool concept.
Yeah, maybe we need to make that game.
I'm working on it. We're gonna do
Yeah.
this. But no, I think that this has been an awesome discussion. I think that that's a great
Yeah.
closing thought to leave it on, and hopefully you guys are excited to see these toolkits that I'm producing every month, and you can make the most of them as well. If you haven't already, definitely go check out that review of the high new real grade kit because, like you said, it's a premium action figure in a model kit box. So
Yeah. No, it's pretty amazing. And then, yeah, it's gonna be in GBO2, and so, yeah, for tomorrow's show, just to get ahead of you asking, we'll
you
probably
already
talk
know where
about
I'm
some
going.
of the yeah, because there's a celebration going on with GBO2, so we'll probably talk a little bit about that. And while, yeah, Comic-Con didn't have any Gundam news, some little news bits trickled out there,
Yeah,
Blue Destiny related, so maybe we'll talk about that, but
for
yeah.
sure. Well, sweet. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And so, yeah, definitely tune into the Gundam Explained show tomorrow, 11 Central, noon Eastern.
Mhm.
And yeah, if you guys are in Raleigh this weekend, come see
Oh,
us.
yeah. That's right.
Until then, thank you so much for indulging this topic with me, Adam.
Oh, of course. Of course. Always fun.
I always
Yeah.
appreciate your input because you have a much broader knowledge of video games than I do.
Yeah, and less in the tabletop, but it's just crazy learning from you how much they
Mm,
are connected. Yeah.
yeah. It's
Yeah.
all same.
Yeah. All same, same.
But yeah, on that note, thank you guys for keeping the chat lively. I appreciate you. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will catch you tomorrow. Cheers.